Okay, it's time to commit. 2024 is the year for prioritizing yourself. Begin your new smile journey with Byte, and you could start seeing results in just 2 to 3 weeks. Just order your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95 at Byte.com. Byte clear liners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces, plus they offer financing options, accept eligible insurance, and you could pay with your HSA, FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th.
We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
Each episode, our special guest brings up a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is Brandon Cronenberg. He is the writer and director of the 2012 film Antiviral, and his latest film, Possessor Uncut, is now out in theaters and drive-ins. Listeners, this is one of our favorite films of this year, and we cannot wait for you to see it. Welcome to the show, Brandon.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course.
We're super excited. This movie, Mary Beth was texting me while she was watching it, and it was just a bunch of what the fuck? Because it's so mind blowing. I love it so much.
I texted Terry, I was like, I can't move. What do I do now after watching this movie? So thank you for that experience that I've rarely had before.
Well, thank you. That's incredibly kind of you.
So can you tell our listeners a little bit about what Possessor is about?
So Possessor is about essentially an assassin, Tasia Voss, who works for a corporation, but she assassinates people by essentially possessing their bodies through this science fiction device. So a host is abducted, implanted with this brain implant. She possesses the host body, and then the host is someone sort of close to the target, who then commits the assassination and is killed. And so it's a kind of perfect crime because it seems like the killer has died, and so it's not traceable to the corporation.
So what an amazing idea. Can you tell us how you came up with the story and what you were interested in exploring with Possessor? Sure.
I mean, honestly, I began writing during the press tour for my first film, Antiviral. And okay. I think the start of the film essentially came from a somewhat trivial personal place. When you're traveling with a film for the first time, it's a very strange experience because you are, in a sense, inventing this public persona as you go, either consciously or unconsciously, and you're performing a version of another version of yourself. So this kind of media self that then very weirdly goes off and has its own life without you online. And so between that and a few other things, I was feeling, in a sense, like I was having a hard time seeing myself in my own life. I was waking up in the mornings feeling that I was sitting up into someone else's life and sort of madly scrambling to construct some kind of character who could operate in that context. So initially I wanted to write a script that was about a character who may or may not be an imposter in their own life, and use that as a way to talk about how we construct characters and narratives just to sort of function as people. Honestly, the thriller sci-fi stuff kind of built out of there. as I was writing. The seed for the film is really in those quieter, dramatic relationship and family scenes.
Cool.
That's so interesting, because that's honestly what spoke to me a lot more than a lot of the stuff that is talked about, I guess, in press right now, is with the science fiction or the body horror, the mental horror of it all. It's actually Tasia's relationship with her family and with herself, and kind of this question of, is she lying to herself and others, or is she who she says she is, that really resonated with me.
Well, I'm glad, because that was definitely, in a sense, the most interesting part to me. I mean, I really love, obviously, the kind of pulpy stuff and the horror thriller elements, but to me, that stuff is more gratifying if it's paired with other ideas.
Yeah. So what was it like working with Christopher Abbott and Andrea Riseborough? I mean, I can't even, their performances are absolutely stunning. So what was it like working with them behind the camera and directing them?
It was great. I mean, the thing is, they're incredibly brilliant, and so they made me look very good and made my job very easy. It's funny, so a few people have phrased that question as, how did you get those great performances out of Chris and Andrea? And I chuckle internally, because I didn't have to get anything out of them. I mean, they're such great actors. They were really contributing in this fantastic way, which is exactly what I hoped for. I mean, I was already completely in love with their work, and I really wanted actors who would come and, in a sense, bring the characters back to life for me in a new way, especially because the development process was fairly long. So I liked having actors who were really going to inject some ideas into the roles.
Sorry.
Oh, no. That's sorry. I was just going to continue to gush about them, I think.
Oh, gosh, continue, please, do. I was going to gush about Christopher Abbott, so we can just gush together.
Me
I was
too.
gonna...
please gush. I've gushed about him so much. I'm sure he'd like someone else to gush about him.
Well, I was just so impressed with how he's playing a character who's playing a character, and it's this really awesome multi-level thing where he has to play him. I don't know. I'm trying to think of how to explain it, but he captures that so well, of being foreign in your own body.
Yeah, he does. And the thing that that really struck me watching this movie, and his performance in particular, was that earlier this year I had watched Piercing, and he is so it's a very stereotypical masculine performance, and seeing him kind of get more in touch with maybe a feminine side with this because of the Tasia connection in him was so interesting to watch. He's really become kind of an actor that I've really grown to watching acting.
Completely. I mean, he's totally fascinating, and they both are, and that's, I sometimes get questions about how I go about casting and how I chose them, but really it's the process for me is just fairly stupid and straightforward, which is that I see actors who have whatever that thing is that is absolutely enthralling about them. You see them on screen, and they're just making all the most interesting choices all the time. It's so satisfying to watch them. Chris and Andrea are both actors like that for me.
Yeah.
And you just know when you get someone like that and you plug them into any role that they're going to do something great with it, because there's no aspect of them as performers that is even remotely lazy. It's always so interesting and considered.
Yeah. And so, married with those amazing performances are these phenomenal practical effects, especially the mind switching scene where they're melting into each other. And I just wanted to talk about where that vision came from. And I know you probably worked with a really awesome special effects artist, but why did you want to show this in such an abstract yet kind of literal way? It's this really interesting abstract yet literal representation of switching minds.
I guess it was always a difficult question from the start, because so much of it is internal. It's, the struggle between the two of them internally. If you were doing it as a novel, it would be very easy, or I wouldn't say necessarily easy, but I mean, you can write this in interior dialogue.
Yeah.
Film is such a visual medium, and it's sort of a waste to not treat it like a visual medium. I didn't want to do voiceover or anything like that. I felt it had to sit in a very visceral place for the audience, and you needed to feel that struggle. So, it was honestly a process of experimentation, trying to find something that would, in my mind, communicate that feeling. Kareem Hussein, my cinematographer, who I met on Antiviral, but we've since become very close friends, and we're actually living down the street from each other through much of Possessor's development. He and I spent a huge amount of time experimenting with practical effects, with camera tricks, over the years of development. We made a couple of just, low budget experimental music videos, and we did a short film, all of that to a certain degree with a view towards building this bank of effects that we could then use on film.
Cool.
And on the other side of it was Dan Martin, our effects artist, our makeup effects artist, who is another mad genius. He and Kareem, I sort of, maybe this is unfair to Dan, but thought of him when I met him as being another Kareem, which is in my mind a huge compliment. They're both just encyclopedias of film knowledge. They're so spectacular at what they do. And so Dan built out these melting torsos and all these incredible fake heads. And he is also just incredible at his job.
Speaking of the fake heads, the one moment of the film that actually made me gasp was such like a not necessarily like a gory moment, but when Colin is pressing into and breaking Tasia's face, because it's so seamless that like I was not expecting it to happen.
Excellent.
Mission accomplished.
And like part of me wants to know how you got that done. And the other part wants to like live in that kind of like magical realm where because it felt so real. And it was just, like I said, so a seamless mix of what I'm assuming is camera tricks as well as practical effects.
Yeah. I mean, it's up to you whether you want me to. I'm nerdy enough about it that I will completely betray the magic and talk about it if you want, or
please do
betray the magic. It's fine. We want to know.
So it was. It almost worked perfectly as a jump cut between Andrea actually lying there and then this sort of this fake collapsible head that Dan made. Interestingly, we didn't shoot it to work that way. I was assuming we would sort of go back and forth because I wasn't planning to use any effects to fudge the seam. Just putting those two shots together, though, they lined up almost perfectly, and so it worked really well. In the edit, we kind of like found that moment. There was a little bit of CGI touch-up, I'll admit, in that one. There isn't a lot of CGI in the film, but there was a little bit of just sort of smoothing of those two shots.
That's cool.
I couldn't tell, so.
No.
It's actually, the CGI is only a few frames to like,
wow.
to
That's
blend
awesome.
them.
That's so cool.
They just happened to line up so beautifully as we were shooting.
The other thing that like that really kind of spoke to me, and I was kind of curious if I was reading too much into it or if this was like intentional. Everyone in this film seems to be interested in exerting control over someone else, even down to Tasia's son Ira with his little puppet toy, all the way up to, the data mining companies and the big shadowy corporation that Tasia works for. It almost as if like, given the opportunity, we will try to exert our control on someone or something else. Am I reading too much into it, or is that kind of intentional?
Partly yes and partly no. You're the first person to bring up the son with the robot, and that was definitely deliberate. That was meant to mirror the sort of possession technology in a sort of small way. I wasn't looking at exertion of control as a kind of universal theme for the film, if I'm being honest. I was looking at possession partly as a way to, again, explore identity, and then partly as a way to, I guess, discuss it in a kind of more specific sense. Okay, it was two things. If we're looking at it in terms of social satire, partly I was interested in the surveillance element, obviously, which is kind of spelled out. But the Snowden leaks happened while I was writing, and I was feeling a lot of despair about the death of privacy through technology. So, there are these sequences where they're data mining and looking through people's webcams, horrifically invading their privacy for the most mundane reason possible, just to see what kinds of curtains they bought in it.
Curtains, pleated.
Yeah. But to me, the possessions themselves stand in for that kind of invasion, because you have, rather than someone turning on your camera or turning on your microphone, they're in your actual body, looking out through your eyes and experiencing the most intimate details of your life through your own nerve endings, or equally horrifying through somebody close to you, someone who you think is an intimate partner, but is actually a full body organic surveillance camera. That was a response to, I guess, my fears and frustrations with that level of with that loss of privacy. The other side of it, though, is I think it's interesting. It's interesting on a lot of levels to me how we essentially construct our sense of self as being these kind of unified, perpetual entities that have our own free will, despite the fact that we're completely not. Every human being is a chorus of conflicted impulses and ideas, and some of that comes from our own brains in a sense. Some of it doesn't. I mean, to the point where there's a lot of interesting science about the ways that microorganisms in our digestive systems or parasites that we pick up can control our behavior. But I think in a more metaphorical sense, I'm interested in psychological infections, in a sense, ideas we pick up from other people without knowing them. And right now that's especially relevant because of everything that's happening with social media and of course, the Russian influence over the US elections and so on.
Oh, yeah.
Because we're operating in this social media landscape, we're all open. We're all in a sense hackable on a level that we never were before. And I think we're only just starting to see the repercussions of that. We're in kind of a transition phase where I think human society is becoming something else. But
that's
we don't know
terrifying.
what it is yet.
That is terrifying.
That is terrifying to contemplate.
So we have talked about Possessor, but Brandon, what movie did you bring with you to discuss today?
So I brought Poltergeist.
In the darkness of early morning, in a new suburban home, 6-year-old Carol Ann will be the first to realize.
They're here. That thing is in there with my baby.
And you will never look at your television set the same way again. Poltergeist. It knows what scares you. A Steven Spielberg production, rated PG.
So, strange and creepy happenings are besting an average Californian family when ghosts begin to commune with their daughter through the TV. Initially playful, the spirits quickly turn menacing, kidnapping the daughter and forcing the parents to reckon with their version of the American dream.
So, Brandon, how old were you when you saw this movie?
I don't remember. I was very, very young. I mean, you asked me to talk about, I guess, the first times I was scared. I'd like to give maybe a shout out to Michael Jackson's Thriller also.
Yes.
I have a very, very vague recollection of seeing that in the early 80s when I was born in 1980, so I was very young, and it was on TV. That's the first time I can remember being scared by anything on screen. Was just that transformation sequence at the start.
Yes, the werewolf transformation.
Yeah, I have such a weird kid's memory of it. When I go back to it, it's not what I remember at all. But that's the first sort of sense of being scared by anything that I saw on screen. Poltergeist, I was also very young. I wish I remember exactly what year it was, but basically there was a family across the street from where I lived, and I was friends with the daughter, but she was a little bit older than I was. And that their father, I guess, delighted in sort of showing us scary movies that were borderline not age appropriate. Again, I forget exactly what age. Maybe I was just a complete coward, and that was the issue. But I remember being like young and confused and like scared by something. Like he showed us Jaws and Poltergeist is the other one I remember. So that was...
Oh my God, he put you through the horror ringer.
Yeah, which, I mean, I know I'm meant to love that, and I wish I was a cooler kid, but I was so young at the time. Some of these, like, not terrifying films, were terrifying as a kid, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
At that age.
So you saw it over at a friend's house. Do you remember any particular, like, scenes that, like, really tormented you, or that were like, wow, what am I watching? Yeah,
funnily enough, and this is also ridiculous when I look back at it, the only scene that scared me was the tree coming in through the window.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, but that's valid.
That's valid, but it's funny because, I have to admit to you, I haven't watched Poltergeist since then.
My God, really? Oh, I was going to say, is it because it scared you so much?
No, not because it was so terrifying, but just because I somehow never, got back. I don't know, it was just some dumb blind spot. And I rewatched it recently, just for this podcast. And the thing that struck me is that it's not really a scary movie for the most part. Towards the end, it kind of becomes a bit scary, but most of it's not very scary. It's not such a terrifying film, but it was none of the stuff at the end that got me. For some reason, it was just the tree coming in and grabbing the kid. Maybe because I was a dorky kid and he was a dorky kid, and I could imagine getting grabbed by a tree. I don't know.
I had a similar fear, though, because I had a bedroom. My bedroom was near a bunch of trees, and after I saw this movie at also an inappropriate age, I guaranteed that the tree was going to punch through and take me out of the window. I was terrified of that. Anyway, this movie also ruined my childhood, but
oh really? Okay, so it's
oh yeah,
a good one to
it destroyed me. But so what happened? So how did the fear affect you after you watched the film? Did you have nightmares? Any funny stories about your reaction to it?
Well, this is embarrassing. But again, you have to understand I was very, very young. I don't remember how young, but I was very, very young. But I came out of it with this fear of being bad to angering trees.
Oh my God, I love it.
We had this huge tree in the front of our house, and I remember I don't know, it was trying to be nice to trees, sort of, or some suspicion of trees that I could piss off these trees and they would come and get me, and so I wanted to be on their side.
So how did you stay on their side? I would like to know how you did that.
You know what? I don't even. It was such a long time ago. I'm trying to remember practically what that was. Was I talking to the trees? Was I sort of just in my mind, kind of, was I looking at them in a sort of conspiratorial way and nodding and being don't worry, when the revolution comes, I'm on your side, or I don't even really know. I just have this sense of not wanting to anger trees, but it was such a long time ago that I know that doesn't totally make sense.
That's just the best reaction I've ever heard to Poltergeist. Everyone always talks about the ghost coming out of the closet and the guy's face melting off, and the clown doll, but the tree and the fear of trees. I love that. I respect that deeply.
It's so funny. I don't even remember the other stuff. I don't think it was due to trauma. It was just the tree is what got me for some reason.
It was due to trauma, but the tree was the one that caused the trauma.
I was so busy with the tree trauma that the other stuff just bounced off me, I guess.
Honestly, I do think the tree is probably the thing that's held up the most for me, because it's so terrifying to see this kid basically being devoured by this tree, and it's there's goopiness involved, and it's so dark and it's so wet that it looks like maybe there's blood involved. So there's it's kind of, I think it's one of the effects that's really held up over the years, and it got me too as a kid. I remember learning to count down from thunderstorms, but also being afraid of counting down from thunderstorms because he's counting down and all of a sudden it's getting closer and closer, and then the tree bursts through. Yes. So I can completely understand, especially if you're really young, how that scene could paint the biggest picture.
Also, Poltergeist, I did not remember that this scene was in it when I saw it as a kid, because I think it scared me so much that I placed it in another movie. I
really?
was no, the tree did not happen in Poltergeist, because Poltergeist, I watched it too young and I was just horrified of ghosts coming out of my closet. I'm still scared of closets a little bit to this day because of Poltergeist. It's a whole thing. But, basically, I think the movie had so many terrifying elements to me that I think my brain removed the tree from it so I could process the rest of the movie, I think. I don't know. My young brain was doing some mental gymnastics, I think.
Well, for sure. That's the thing. When you look back at yourself, it's being nice to trees. And not even knowing what that means. It's just at that age, your brain is doing all this weird stuff that then I think mutates over the years as you look back. Which movie did you put it in?
An unnamed movie that was just about trees attacking children. It wasn't it wasn't even an actual movie. It was I just placed it in another out of that film. I don't know why.
Compartmentalize that. And
I
just
did
put it over
because
here.
when I rewatched it, I was oh my God, the tree is. This happens in Poltergeist, because so much happens in Poltergeist that it is just I forgot how many things happened because I removed a lot of them to help my young brain. I don't know why I did it, but that's how my brain decided to process Poltergeist at the young age of 7 or 8.
There is a lot that goes on. Looking back at it, it is just a ton of stuff happens pretty quickly.
Yeah. What did you think of rewatching it? What did it? did it kind of scare you? Is probably the wrong word, but like, what were your reactions to watching it now as a grown-up, basically?
I found it to be a very, very weird film. Like, it's
okay,
really,
yeah.
Watching it now, very strange. And I mean, kind of endearingly strange and surreal. So I kind of appreciated it that way. But I can see, I know it was a successful film. I feel like it kind of feels a bit more like a weird cult film now.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that since we've been doing this podcast, we've seen a lot of movies from the 80s, because apparently that was like the decade of kinder trauma. So the thing that like has really kind of jumped out at me over the last year that we've been doing this is the American dream in the 80s films, and how like everyone is moving into suburbia, and yet the movies were still taking the idea of suburbia and the idea of the American dream and just basically tearing it apart. Cause what I really appreciated watching it this last time is in particular how the ghosts basically turn all of their possessions against them. There's the old wise tree that the father is talking about, it's been here for so long, it's here to protect us, and it turns against them. The toys, Robbie's room is filled with like there's an alien poster I noticed this time. There's like Star Wars posters. There's a Darth Vader poster. There's like all of this like merchandise and that kind of capitalism from like the 80s that eventually turns on Robbie, and the pool turns into like a mass grave, and the TVs communicating them from the beyond. Like all of these like things that are like cornerstones of what people wanted are ultimately attacking them.
That is interesting. And what do you, along those lines, what do you think now about how that kind of 80s suburban retro thing fits into that history? Because it seems like there's a big move, a big nostalgia now with Stranger Things and all these sort of 80s pseudo Spielberg throwback.
Yeah, and that's interesting because I think in watching, we've, like Terry said, we've watched a lot of these 80s suburbia movies, and Poltergeist follows that sort of pattern, but is also super upsetting. Like, it's much sadder and much more nihilistic, I think, than other suburban 80s movies, because at the end, like, there isn't really a solution. Like, yeah, they stopped it, but they don't have a home. And so, like, that American dream from the 80s is completely destroyed, and they're kind of left with nothing. And that links to me to the discussion of Ronald Reagan, because at the beginning of the film, Craig T. Nelson is reading a book about Ronald Reagan.
Yeah,
and so,
while smoking weed.
While smoking weed.
It's that dichotomy.
Like, the best. And so it's this really interesting tension, I think, between like this suburban American dream that Ronald Reagan was like pumping, and the hyper-masculine hard body, and like, this is what we need. And it kind of feels like that's a little bit happening now. I mean, like, our president in the United States is terrible, and like it seems to be creating this weird mythos around what it means to be an American, which is completely untrue. But I think this kind of suburban throwback is almost a way to maybe process all of this weirdness around, I mean, like, speaking of possessor, but identity, and how how we're supposed to form our identities around this like completely fake idea of the American dream, and like it's completely driven by a capitalistic desire.
Well, for sure. And I mean, interesting that you bring that up, obviously, in the context of modern politics, because Trump keeps mentioning suburbs and like the end of the suburbs. And there's this whole discussion about the end of the suburbs as though that is American life. I mean, is that, I don't live there, and I'm sure there are suburbs that I'm not seeing, but it feels like maybe in the 80s or in the 50s, this suburban America was the ideal. But does anyone really think that anymore? I mean, is that the inherent image, the sort of essential image of America anymore? It doesn't seem to be from the outside.
I don't think it is, but like, it's still interesting because my aunt, who's only 9 years older than me, like lived in the city in Philadelphia. And then when she had kids, she came to the suburbs, like, and I think with the suburbs, it's not just like the big house. I also think they were thinking about kids, and they were thinking about like, expanding, but I also think that like having children and getting married isn't as emphasized as it used to be. I think that kind of call to like domesticity is not as important now. So I think a lot of people I know, like we live in the city and don't want to leave the city. Like the city is the best place to be. So I think there is still like that kind of remaining call to the suburbs, but it's being diminished by a lack of wanting to conform to that like domestic life, like mom, dad, 3 kids, pool in the backyard, and a golden retriever.
And do you think that because of that, people are maybe more inclined to treat the suburbs in films and in television as this kind of, nostalgic alternate universe rather than an ideal that has to be addressed and maybe combated in the way that a film like Poltergeist does?
I do. It's so weird because last week we talked about Gremlins, which is also another movie that is about kind of this suburban, very like white town that ends up being like, infiltrated by these gremlins. And it's such watching that and then watching this with the Poltergeist really definitely has like a perspective, because when it's first introducing suburbia, it's showing every single house looks exactly the same. Everything is so cookie cutter. Everything is just, and even like one of my favorite shots in the film is after the chairs move in the kitchen, and it's a shot of that kitchen, and then it immediately transitions to a kitchen that Mr. Freeling, Steve is selling someone, and it's the same exact kitchen minus the like dinner table. Mm-hmm. And it's this like idea of like, you have given up the diversity of city life for this idealized heaven, this idealized American dream aspect, but it's the same as everyone else's. For sure. And there's also, of course, the fact that they're building this on bodies. It's this sort of obliteration of history and death. And I feel like there was a trend for a while toward having things built on graveyards and things built on there were
this sort of like sanitizing of the past in the name of progress that then fails because the past comes back for it.
Well, and even like the land developer, Mr. T, like he's when Steve finds out that they just moved the headstones of like the previous or their future plot, he's like, well, at least it's not an Indian burial ground. Like that is his quote. Like, so it's like, I'm like, okay, so you're definitely like interacting with this idea of burying over the past, but is this any better? Because you have just literally moved the headstones of these poor people that you're erasing, like you said, erasing that history.
And were there so many Indian burial ground movies that it sounds like
yes,
they were writing it and they were just like, hey, it could be an Indian burial ground. And I was like, no, it's always an Indian burial ground. Okay, well, at least this isn't an Indian burial ground.
Exactly.
Progress.
Well, and that's so funny because in the suburb I lived in growing up, I babysat a family of kids who lived next door to someone who had a fucking cemetery in their front yard. And it was like a mini cemetery. Really? It was like a family, and it was gravestones of the family. But I always thought of Poltergeist, even into high school, when I would leave their house and take the shortcut through the backyard and walk past the graves. I would avoid the graves and not walk over them because I was terrified that I was going to like wake them up and make them upset. So Poltergeist made me like absolutely terrified of any of that. And I just could not understand how anyone could live in a house with the graveyard in their front yard. But
that's really interesting. And I'm also glad that Poltergeist got you so much because I'm less embarrassed about it now.
Oh, yeah. No, I was going to say like, don't be embarrassed because Poltergeist like just absolutely wrecked my entire, like everything about it. It just steeped into my bones. And now I love horror movies, so I guess that has something to do with it. So you saw Poltergeist at a young age. You said you also saw Jaws. So like was horror like for you as a young person, do you think it kind of helped shape what you are doing today with Possessor and Antiviral? Like what other movies really influenced you as a kid?
I don't know, honestly.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I don't know how to, because I know a lot of people, first of all, in film, we're very serious cinephiles from a very young age. And also, it's interesting getting into horror. The horror community which is, of course, absolutely wonderful. And I feel more connected to these days because I know so many who are people who are active parts of it. And a lot of people grew up specifically with horror and being horror fans, and that informed later choices to get into filmmaking and to make horror movies. I didn't really have that. I mean, I saw horror movies, of course, and, whatever, sleepovers with friends, to watch horror movies. I did all that stuff, but I wasn't specifically a horror fan in that in that basic way from the start. I liked a variety of things. I also wasn't a huge cinephile right from the start. I always have watched movies, but I was more nerdy about books, to be honest, and came to film in this sort of roundabout way.
But I love that, though, because I feel like it's cool to hear about people who didn't grow up with horror, because I feel like it is so much more interesting to me sometimes to be like, oh, so like you didn't grow up with this, and it's just really fascinating to hear like you came to it later. So what kind of films did you watch as a kid? Like, what were your favorite kind of movies to watch? I mean, honestly, I forget, when I was very young, I had a Betamax tape with a bunch of movies on it that I would watch over and over again. Hell yeah. The one that stands out was the Batman movie, like the Adam West. Yeah. Very good. Batman. I watched that quite a bit. Some like early Disney movies, and I was quite young, so like Pinocchio and some of those those early cartoons. Again, it's not that I didn't see horror films, but I wasn't I wasn't especially drawn to them more than anything else in the way that some people are, just I don't know, for whatever reason. That's fair.
I am so glad that you talked about a Betamax, because you and I are about the same age. I was born in 81, and I have fond memories of my Betamax, and everyone we talk to, if they were of age for it, they always talk about the VHS, but I'm like, man, the Betamax, that was it.
Beta was the better technology,
It was.
The higher quality technology lost out, and we all suffered for it.
It's true.
It was also a smaller tape. You could have more of them on a shelf.
You could. Oh. I loved my Betamax collection. Wow, I'm old.
I'm a baby, and I am a child, and I only know about Betamax tapes from a video archive I worked in.
That's terrifying. It's not terrifying. It's a totally obscure, useless technology, but it's terrifying to grow old, essentially.
I mean, yeah, that's fair.
The one scene that really that for some reason watching it this time really brought me back to being a kid, though, was the clown. The clown attack, because for some reason this watch of it reminded me of, and I don't know if you ever knew these toys, Brandon, but My Pet Monster.
Oh yeah,
from the 80s. Do you know about them, Mary Beth?
No.
My Pet Monster.
He's bigger than big.
When he fights battles, he always wins.
And he's your friend, too.
He breaks his chains.
Put him on you and break away, too.
With My Pet Monster, you're busting loose.
He's big.
And scary.
And helps people, too.
And he's your friend, too.
My Pet Monster plays all day.
Tough.
Awesome.
Looking great.
And all your friends will want him for their friends, too.
My Pet Monster has breakaway chains from Amtoy and American Greetings Company.
Do you remember the cartoon and the song?
I do. Yeah. I love the cartoon. I watched the cartoon so much. But I had a My Pet Monster doll, and the idea behind them, Mary Beth, is that they're like this monster. It was blue fur, and he had these yellow orange handcuffs that could be broken. And the idea was that he was a monster, but if he wore these handcuffs, he would be a stuffed animal. And that's what the cartoon was based on. It was how the kid hid the fact that he was a monster from his parents or the villains, was that you put the handcuffs on him and he would be just a little stuffed animal. And I had one of those, and for some reason, I don't know why this just hit me this time, but I remember having one of those dolls, and I would put him in the closet at night because I didn't want him coming alive and strangle me like the clown does.
Wow. I think that's fair. My pet. I forgot about the handcuffs. That is, yeah.
The handcuffs. That's quite a choice. It's a very interesting aesthetic and choice.
It made sense at the time, though. He was sort of like the good monster, and then who was the bad one? Like Beastor or something.
Is he like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde situation with this little dude?
No, I think
he was friendly.
Yeah, he was friendly, and he would become a friendly living monster, if I remember correctly. I probably need to watch. But he was.
That's what my pet okay, this is like, okay. I'm so sorry. This is like going off the fucking rails. So that, I just Googled it and I just got hit in the face with this memory that there was a My Pet Monster in my grandparents' basement, and my fucking uncle told me that it was a real monster, and I couldn't come to the basement where he slept because that monster would get me. Because I used to jump on him and try to wake him up in the morning when he was like in high school, and I was like 4 or 5, and I thought that monster was going to get me, and I swear to God, it was a My Pet Monster. Oh my God,
that's hilarious!
Wow.
Please tell me it wasn't like passed down from your grandparents and were that old.
No. It was my uncle. It was my uncle's. Okay. I'm 27. I'm not too much of a baby, but I'm still a baby.
She's lying. She's like 10.
Oh, shut up. But yeah, wow. This podcast has brought back a deluge of memories that terrified me of the creepy thing in the closet, and it was a My Pet Monster.
And they never explained that he was friendly. He was on your side.
He was.
No, it
but
was
like, I'll tell you what. At midnight, when you've watched Poltergeist, you do not see him that way.
No, I'm sure.
And I remember like just opening the closet door and always getting scared and always like creeping around the basement, like ready for him to jump out. And I used to like practice jumping down the stairs, like go down really quick and run and then come back up. So wow. Huh. And he was friendly all along.
Thanks, Poltergeist.
Thanks.
He was.
So do we want to give this movie a rating out of 5?
Yeah.
Okay, Terry, how many melting faces out of 5 do you give Poltergeist?
I think obviously this movie has a lot of like nostalgia for me. It was one of my favorites growing up as a kid. So like, it's really hard for me to look at it in any other terms. But I do think that even though some of the like the face melting effect hasn't completely aged very well, I do think that it's a surprisingly subversive film for a movie that has Steven Spielberg's name attached to it in the 80s. I really do think, I mean, there's always like talks of who really directed it. I don't really care, but I do think Tobe Hooper brought a lot of his very kind of dark satire to it, even though, it definitely has like that kind of, nostalgic feel to it. I do think that there is an edge to it that I appreciate as one of the 80s.
Yeah.
More kid-friendly horror movies. So I think I would give it I think I'd probably give it a 4 dissolving faces out of 5.
Okay.
What about you, Mary Beth?
I want to give it 4.5 dissolving faces out of 5, which I think is higher than my previous rating, because the more I think about Poltergeist, besides now the fact that this whole monster has now become a part of my childhood narrative, I did not really appreciate how nihilistic this movie is comparatively speaking to other 80s horror. And I think I really appreciate, like you said, with Tobe Hooper adding this like darkness to it, and I really appreciate that subversive darkness while also balancing it with that Steven Spielberg name. And I think it's just in that context, it's such a fascinating movie, and it's just kind of soul crushing in a way that I really enjoy. Something's wrong with me, it's fine. So that's my score. Brandon, you have the final word. What is your rating on Poltergeist? How many dissolving faces out of 5 do you give this movie?
I don't know. You know what? I feel like I need to abstain.
Oh, no!
I feel like I'm going to lose my filmmaker card if I rate another filmmaker's work on a 1 to 5 scale. I'm just give
it an arbitrary number. Come on, Brandon. Let's go.
I'll give it the average. 4.25
cool.
average between the two of you. But, honestly, actually, I would say I did enjoy it quite a bit, and more actually discussing it with you guys. I think you're right.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Brandon, for joining us to talk about Poltergeist and your movie Possessor. Where can our listeners find you, and do you have and what do you have coming up you'd like to share?
No one can find me, hopefully. I try not to be found, but I'm sure it's possible to stumble on me somewhere. I have 2 other films in the works. One is called Infinity Pool, which is a kind of tourist resort satire with some sci-fi horror elements, and then a trippy space horror movie called Dragon. Both of them are pretty far in development, and I would love to sort of make them back-to-back. I guess it's a little pandemic dependent right now, but hopefully I'll be able to talk more about
Trippy space movie, yes, please. Exactly. That's my encouragement. That'll mean a lot to distributors, I know. So listeners, you've heard from us, but we want to hear from you. What was your experience with Poltergeist? You can send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com or reach out to us directly on Twitter. I'm at MB McAndrews.
And I'm at Gaily Dreadful.
And of course, keep the conversation going by chatting with the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe.
Thank you to Steve Barnold for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thanks to everyone for listening. Stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children? Won't somebody please think of the children? Somebody please think of the children!
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is the briefing room?
It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.